Letter 405 by Charles Lamb. Colebrook Row, Islington. Saturday, 20th Jan, 1827. Dear Robinson, I called upon you this morning and found that you were gone to visit a dying friend. I had been upon a like errand. Poor Norris has been lying dying for now almost a week. Such is the penalty we pay for having enjoyed a strong constitution. Whether he knew me or not, I know not, or whether he saw me through his poor glazed eyes, but the group I saw about him I shall not forget. Upon the bed, or about it, were assembled his wife and 2 daughters, and poor deaf Richard, his son, looking doubly stupefied. There they were, and seemed to have been sitting all the week. I could only reach out a hand to Mrs. Norris. Speaking was impossible in that mute chamber. By this time, I hope, it is all over with him. In him, I have a loss the world cannot make up. He was my friend and my father's friend all the life I can remember. I seem to have made foolish friendships ever since. Those are friendships which outlive a second generation. Old as I am waxing, in his eyes I was still the child he first knew me. To the last he called me Charlie. I have none to call me Charlie now. He was the last link that bound me to the temple. You are but of yesterday. In him seemed to have died the old plainness of manners and singleness of heart. Letters he knew nothing of, nor did his reading extend beyond the pages of the Gentleman's Magazine. Yet there was a pride of literature about him from being amongst books. He was librarian, and from some scraps of doubtful Latin which he had picked up in his office of entering students, that gave him very diverting airs of pedantry. Can I forget the erudite look with which, when he had been in vain trying to make out a black-letter text of Chaucer in the Temple Library, he laid it down and told me that, in those old books, Charlie, there is sometimes a deal of very indifferent spelling, and seemed to console himself in the reflection. His jokes, for he had his jokes, are now ended, but they were old trusty perennials, staples that pleased after decis repetita, and were always as good as new. One song he had, which was reserved for the night of Christmas Day, which we always spent in the temple. It was an old thing, and spoke of the flat bottoms of our foes and the possibility of their coming over in darkness, and alluded to threats of an invasion many years blown over. And when he came to the part, "We'll still make 'em run, and we'll still make 'em sweat, in spite of the devil and Brussels Gazette," his eyes would sparkle as with the freshness of an impending event. And what is the Brussels Gazette now? I cry while I enumerate these trifles. How shall we tell them in a stranger's ear? His poor good girls will now have to receive their afflicted mother in an inaccessible hovel in an obscure village in Hertz, where they have been long struggling to make a school without effect, and poor deaf Richard, and the more helpless for being so, is thrown on the wide world. My first motive in writing, and indeed in calling on you, was to ask if you were enough acquainted with any of the benchers to lay a plain statement before them of the circumstances of the family. I almost fear not, for you are of another hull, but if you can oblige me and my poor friend, who is now insensible to any favors, pray exert yourself. You cannot say too much good of poor Norris and his poor wife. Yours ever, Charles Lamb. This letter, describing the death of Randall Norris, sub-treasurer and librarian of the Inner Temple, was printed with only very slight alterations in Hone's Table Book, 1827, and again in the last Essays of Elia, 1833, under the title, A Deathbed. It was, however, taken out of the second edition, and Confessions of a Drunkard substituted, in deference to the wishes of Norris's family. Mrs. Norris, as I have said, was a native of Widford, where she had known Mrs. Field, Lamb's grandmother, with her son Richard, who was deaf and peculiar Mrs. Norris moved to Widford again, where the daughters, Miss Betsy and Miss Jane, had opened a school Goddard house, which they retained until a legacy restored the family prosperity. Soon after that they both married, each a farmer named Tween. They survived until quite recently. Mrs. Coe, an old scholar at the Mrs. Morris's school in the 20s, gave me, in 1902, some reminiscences of those days, from which I quote a passage or so. When he joined the Norrises' dinner table, he kept everyone laughing. Mr. Richards sat at one end, and some of the school children would be there too. One day Mr. Lamb gave everyone a fancy name all round the table and made a verse on each. "You are so-and-so," he said, "and you are so-and-so," adding the rhyme. "What's he saying? What are you laughing at?" Mr. Richard asked testily, for he was short-tempered. Miss Betsy explained the joke to him, and Mr. Lamb, coming to his turn, said, only he said it in verse, "Now, Dick, it's your turn. I shall call you Gruborum, because all you think of is your food and your stomach." Mr. Richard pushed back his chair in a rage and stamped out of the room. "Now I've done it," said Mr. Lamb. "I must go and make friends with my old chum. Give me a large plate of pudding to take to him." When he came back, he said, "It's all right. I thought the pudding would do it." Mr. Lamb and Mr. Richard never got on very well, and Mr. Richard didn't like his teasing ways at all, but Mr. Lamb often went for long walks with him because no one else would. He did many kind things like that. There used to be a half-holiday when Mr. Lamb came, partly because he would force his way into the schoolroom and make seriousness impossible. His head would suddenly appear at the door in the midst of lessons, with, "Well, Betsy, how do, Jane?" "Oh, Mr. Lamb," they would say, and that was the end of work for that day. He was really rather naughty with the children. One of his tricks was to teach them a new kind of catechism. Mrs. Coe does not remember it, but we may rest assured, I fear, that it was secular, and he made a great fuss with Lizzie Hunt for her skill in saying the Lord's Prayer backwards, which he had taught her. "We'll still make 'em run," Garrick's Hearts of Oak, sung in Harlequin's Invasion. "How shall we tell them in a stranger's ear?" A quotation from Lamb himself, in the lines written soon after the preceding poem, in 1798, see Vol. Roman 4.